Good evening. Welcome to Justice for All. I'm Gene Mitchell, and the fact that I'm here in this chair means that Barry and John are not here. John just got back from a meet with Drew, where he ran the fastest 2-mile race by any high schooler in the country by 10 seconds. And Jack, who's in 7th grade, ran a 4:42 mile. And Barry, as such, is at the Pensacola Sports Association tonight receiving an award for Drew. So I'm here, and you might remember from a few weeks ago, I've got my friend Dr. Mark Ruiz here with us. Mark Ruiz is a psychologist. I know him because he helps me in criminal cases as it relates to sometimes insanity, sometimes retardation or psychosis, where somebody might be incompetent, and then a lot of times in mitigation. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. If you have any questions that relate to mental health in the criminal justice system or other, please call and ask us questions about it. The show is better when you call. If you feel nervous and you don't want to call, you're most welcome to text. We will read your text on the air. The telephone number is 850-432-7768. And now we'll get to Barry's favorite part of the show, which is the local events. Did you see that we have the Pensacola Sports Association banquet tonight? Do you have any young people getting awards over there?
I do not have anyone getting awards over there. My son knows the Barossett boys and has run with them, and they are very impressive kids, so not surprising that they would be involved.
Well, I don't know if Charles Geen is watching, but you know, every time we talk about Drew and Jack, and I think that they are I know that they're generational talents, his response has always been, well, I haven't seen anything about them in the annals of the Pensacola Sports Association, so now I guess they've made it. I'm being tongue-in-cheek. The other piece with regard to Pensacola, every now and then we get some really killer event. And if you are watching, and if you haven't gone to this before, next week, from March 3rd through March 9th, we have the Sun Belt Conference Basketball Championships. We have NCAA Division I basketball teams right here in Pensacola competing, and you know, I've been to one game so far, and I'm going to go to another one this year, but it's a good piece of Pensacola, and I encourage everyone out there to go.
I unfortunately have never been myself. We had a foreign exchange student from Spain a couple of years ago, and he was lucky enough to go see a couple of games while they were here, and yeah, it's a great event. I know the community comes alive when they're here, which is great.
Anything else, any other announcements you need to make for what's going on here locally in Pensacola, Doc?
Well, no, I know we got track season in full bloom. Speaking of track, so my son is doing that at almost any given weekend. Head out to Pine Forest High School and cheer on your favorite athletes. But
yeah, you know, for the longest time we didn't have a great track around here. Years and years ago, Gulf Breeze High School had a really good track. Then I think from the work of Everett Spain and Coach Fauché over at Catholic, he was at Washington at the time, Booker T got a nice track. And then Coach Paul Bryan, I think his name is, who had been at Pine Forest, he's retired but he's still there, he has kind of pushed so that we have an outstanding facility over at Pine Forest High School. And yeah. I went to at least one event for that meet, and I saw Peter run, and 2:10 and a half for the first meet of the year with, you know, that's all right.
Not bad. He's got a ways to grow too, so I think that'll be great. It's fun to watch. It's a long, hot day in the sun, but it's a great facility. So
I think it's the best entertainment. Let's get into it just a little bit. You know, have you followed, I'm interested in your take as a psychologist. Have you followed Rob Reiner's son, the arrest of Rob Reiner for killing the legendary actor and director?
So I've only followed it a bit tangentially. I know that Rob Reiner's son, who's been arrested for that, I know he had some drug, alcohol problems, some mental health issues. Haven't really gotten too much detail about that. From what I can tell, I won't be surprised if I hear him making an insanity plea, or at least using his mental health and substance abuse history in his defense. What I've gathered makes it sound like it's going to be a part of the trial.
Well, I only know what the headlines are, and I know that Rob Reiner, meathead from All in the Family, right? The Spinal Tap, had this son that has suffered mental illness, that he's suffered addictions, and then there was this episode at Conan O'Brien's house, and then there was this horrific murder. Mm-hmm. If I was the lawyer in the public defender's office that was assigned that case, then I would reach out to someone like you and I would say, Dr. Ruiz, I'm not really sure what we have here, but I know that my client has a history of mental illness. I know he has a history of addiction. You know, we'd like to bring you in to do an evaluation and advise us. If you had gotten that phone call, what would you be looking for? How would you handle something like that, just going in dry like that?
Well, going in dry, again, from what I understand from the headlines, what I've looked at briefly, you know there's going to be a paper trail of mental health treatments, substance abuse treatments. There's going to be some documentation somewhere, so you got to start with that. I think one of the things that to me is quite unique about this situation is these are Hollywood elites, right? Like you said, it happened at Conan O'Brien's house. So you have a really good glimpse at what his son's mental status was that evening at the time around or right close to that incident, which a lot of times when you're dealing with insanity pleas, you don't have a whole lot of that information. You're really trying to guess what did this person look like at the time of the crime. That's going to be, to me, that's going to be a very unique thing, and you're going to want to capture that information as quickly as possible before it dissipates, before memories change, before stories change. What did the son look like that evening?
Well, this is kind of where I enjoy either sitting across from John and Barry or sitting across from you, because in my situations, when I'm trying to help somebody that I'm concerned might have a mental health issue, I'll think I know what's going on. And you know, I recall one time when I first was getting to know you, I reached out to your office and I said, hey doc, I'm concerned I have somebody that may have been insane at the time of this criminal episode.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, all right, well, Gene, I'll get out to jail, I'll go and visit with him. And you came back and you called me up and you said, Gene, we can't get to the issue of insanity because I'm concerned that the person might not be competent to participate in the process. So something like that is to say, to what degree is it the lawyer telling you, here's what we need, versus you saying, here's what's going on, and you're more or less relying on your own artistry and stuff?
Yeah, well, and that's a good question, and honestly, I'll bet you kind of deal with the similar sort of question as well, because it's kind of mental health 101. The question that's coming at you is rarely the question that needs to be answered.
I see.
Right? So you may come to me and say, hey, I think we've got an insanity issue here. That's nice and all, but that's why you call experts, right? Because we know if that's what we're really looking at or what we need to be looking at in actuality. And yeah, so those are challenges.
Okay. I didn't really do a good enough job tonight of introducing you, Dr.
Sure.
Ruiz. I know that as we work together, it's generally on criminal cases. I know you've testified in civil cases, but what is your main area of work, if there is one?
So I'm a clinical psychologist, so I basically work 8 to 5, work in a clinical practice. If you've ever seen the show Shrinking on Apple TV, which
Sure.
my wife and I are watching, that's what I do, but not quite as crazily as those guys do it. I work primarily with adults. I think the youngest people I see are maybe 16 or 17 years old, so much older adolescents to adults. I specialize in older adults. I specialize in anxiety-based disorders and post-traumatic stress disorders, stuff like that. But, you know, as a psychologist, I'm a bit of a general practitioner, and I do some legal work.
Is it an annoyance when someone like me calls up and say, hey, I've got someone in the jail that might need you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
You're
I mean,
very kind.
one of the things maybe this applies to you as a lawyer too. One of the things I like about the work is it's very diverse. A lot of variety in what you see and what you get to deal with. So.
You know, I see you all the time, basically because you bring reports and you go to the jail, but exactly where are you located? Where's your office?
I'm actually officing with Ronald Yarbrough, who's been like a
Okay.
pillar of the community
Sure.
for many years. Our offices are right off of Airport Boulevard near Sacred Heart Hospital.
You know, I worked with Dr. Yarbrough mainly in the 90s when I was in the public defender's office. But, you know, I went to school with his daughter.
Yeah.
She was an outstanding champion tennis player.
Yeah.
Allison.
Yep,
So,
Allison. She works
tell
in
her I
the
said hey.
she works in the office from time to time as well. We get to see her. She's great family.
I want to start to get into it just a little bit. All right. Do you use AI?
Very rarely.
Is that right?
Very rarely. I think I've sent you a couple of pictures that I developed on AI from
Okay,
time to
all
time.
right,
But
all right.
yeah, no, I'll use it to write some letters once in a while or to You know, for example, some of the consent forms I use, I've run it through AI to see if I can tweak it, just a little thing here or there. Do some research.
Well, you know, we have some relatives in California, and they came to town a couple years ago, and you know they're hanging around the living room, and you know what do you talk about? So they talk about what's going on, and you know here our relatives came to town and were talking about AI, and I thought, oh man, the folks in California know about this, and all my school teacher friends that have students seem to know about this. So I tried to familiarize myself, you know, a little bit. And you know, there's this news story today that there's this mass shooting in Canada, and you know, part of the news is that OpenAI, the ChatGPT,
yeah,
very good. I'm old. Company says, you know, our staffers were this close to notifying law enforcement based on what this shooter's searches were on the application. You know, so it drove home to me as a criminal defense lawyer that, you know, we certainly are being watched. We're not just talking to some, you know, to some doggone computer.
Yeah.
You know, we're not anonymous.
No, and that's quite frightening. I'll tell you, I have a lot of clients who use ChatGPT or other AI tools for a wide variety of issues. And I think a lot of people probably have heard about AI being used as a companion, people forming intimate relationships with AI. That means there are, from what you're saying, there are human individuals screening very intimate conversations with a computer chatbot. I know I would not like that. I'd be very skittish about something like that happening. I guess I can understand their reasoning for doing that. But yeah, that's a little bit terrifying, frankly.
You know, as it relates to this program, we've talked before on this show, Barry and I think when you were here, about how, you know, in Pensacola, there was news about 6 months ago that the company is called Flock, F-L-O-C-K, and the gist of it is there are more cameras that are mounted around this city that have a relationship with cameras in the rest of the cities in the country, and they knew nothing all day but just take pictures of every license plate that goes by, and does all kinds of work and feeds that work in a central database, you know, which gets back to, you know, we're certainly being watched.
Yeah, so as an attorney, what kind of privacy issues does that raise? Is that, are we having our constitutional rights betrayed in those kind of situations?
Rights diminish. All of them do, it seems. Mm-hmm. There's always a relationship between privacy and safety. But this is going in a different direction. You know, when we were in school, we were taught if law enforcement is going to ask you any question, you must be Mirandized. You know, we're going to talk about some traffic stops here in a few minutes, and that was the rule. If you're detained and cops are going to ask you a question, they have to let you know what your rights are, just to assure that everything that you say is said voluntarily. Mm-hmm. Well, I get out of school, and here come the exceptions. Your rights start to get whittled down. Now, if you're a fine driver, but I'm sure you've had your share of traffic tickets and the like.
Yeah.
You know, you get pulled over for speeding or running a stop sign. The officer's not going to say, "Let me read you your rights first." No, there's an exception to the Miranda requirement. They can ask you questions that cause the traffic stop exception, you know, the traffic infraction exception to the Miranda requirement. But to your question about, you know, our privacy rights whittled down, yeah. But the question all becomes, do you have an expectation of privacy? And the argument against us is if you get in your car and you're driving along and you drive past a camera that's mounted out in the public, you don't have an expectation of privacy, you know, is the argument.
Yeah.
But certainly that expectation is being whittled down to getting to the point where it's almost non-existent.
Yeah, it's getting scarier with AI and with all of these tools is certainly a challenge.
All right, here's what I wanted to do today. I wanted to, you know, you have your area of expertise, but I'm going to put you on the spot.
All right.
And we're going to talk about, you know, when I last talked to you, you were telling me that Peter, your son,
yeah,
good boy, smart kid, excellent athlete, runs a 210.
At the beginning of the season.
Didn't he run a 205?
Yes,
205. I'll bet he breaks 2 minutes before it's over. But I want to talk about traffic stops, okay? Mm-hmm. All right. When I talk to you about the work that I do, you hear me use words sometimes like probable cause and proof beyond a reasonable doubt, right?
Right.
Right. I'm interested, as a member of the general public, Dr. Ruiz, if that's your real name.
Sure.
Do you know what a member of law enforcement has to have in their mind in order to stop your car?
I really, honestly, I don't.
Okay, all right.
I assume it would have to do something with the probable cause. They would have to have a
Okay, I appreciate
a
that.
bona fide reason to think that they need to pull you over.
I want you to think of there being like a totem pole of burdens of proof. And the highest and most difficult burden of proof is the reasonable doubt burden of proof. It is the highest standard in any criminal system in the land, all right? Way on the bottom of it, I guess would be scintilla, but way on the bottom of it would be reasonable suspicion. And in order for a member of law enforcement to effectuate a traffic stop, turn on their blue lights and tell you to turn and pull over, they have to have a reasonable suspicion that you're engaged in misconduct, all right? So that's kind of the line, and it is quite low. When we started doing this stuff back in the 90s, I remember the real work by young public defenders back then was to determine the real reason why a member of law enforcement pulled somebody over. And typically, we would be looking to find if there was a pretextual stop. And the big example would be a person of color walking through a white neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. And a member of law enforcement stopping that person entirely because of that. And if we were able to persuade the judge that, to heck with the fact that there was a busted taillight, the real reason the officer stopped this guy is because we're getting a message right now. We're going to go to a break, come back and ask questions of either me or Dr. Ruiz.
Practice coordinator for Derek Jones Facial Plastic Surgery. Dr. Derek Jones is amazing. He's double board certified, he's skilled, and he's been doing this show with Blab TV for almost 2 decades. If you're looking to grow your business, Blab TV has an amazing reach in this local viewing area. We always hear, "We saw you on Blab Television." I'm Andrea Housen with Derek Jones Facial Plastic Surgery, and I am Blab TV.
Is it time yet?
It's time.
Time for dinner.
Oh, terrific.
Pasta dinner.
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
I'm Kathy Holsworth, Artistic Director at Pensacola Little Theater. Join me on the first Monday of every month at 7 p.m. for the Center Stage, where me and my artistic friends talk about all things on the stage and at the Clark Family Cultural Center. Join us, won't you?
All right, we are back. We got a text message. I said I'll read every one of them on the air. The question is, what is a detention hearing? Very, very good question. If you or I were to get arrested and not get out of jail, we would go in front of a judge within 24 hours, and they call it video court. And typically at that video court, there would be a very quick determination of conditions of release. But now, in the past couple of years, there's been a change, and for qualifying offenses, a week or so after the first appearance, video court, there's a detention hearing. And what happens is the government, or sometimes the judge on his or her own, will move for the detention of the person. So it's not a matter of bond, paying a bondsman or posting a cash bond. It's where either the government or the judge or both are concerned that forget bond, this person ought not be released. And it's a two-prong analysis. The first basically is whether there's a strong probability that a dangerous crime was committed by the person. And secondarily, it's whether there's anything that can be done to assure the safety of the community and the person showing up for court later on. I might say this might come across as a bit controversial. I am cynical about it. What I seem to find myself arguing most often is that while at a detention hearing there might be evidence strong evidence against the person that they may have done something dangerous, I always find myself arguing that there's not appropriate evidence to suggest that detention is necessary to satisfy a government interest like appearance in court or safety of community. But I keep seeing these darn detention hearings getting granted. So I would say to the texter, get ready. Treat that detention hearing almost like it's a trial. Get your witnesses together, have your meetings before the detention hearing with your lawyer, because what happens at the detention hearing is going to impact whether you're released pending trial, and if you're released pending trial, you can do a lot better job preparing for your trial. But that's a really good question, and we do appreciate them. Again, the number here is 850-432-7768.
So it sounds like you're saying in a detention hearing that the outcome is going to lean towards detention in a lot of cases.
I'm critical, but that's how I feel.
Okay.
Yeah. It seems like most often, in my opinion, and I welcome any judge to come and sit in one of these chairs and tell me what they think, but in my perspective, it seems that when I'm looking at the judges that I admire, that I like, blah, 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 I feel like they're sitting there saying, well, we're persuaded that there's a really strong probability that this person did this, and therefore we're going to detain them. That's what it looks like to me a lot, not every time. And I realize I have my biases, but that's what it appears. So yes, I would answer your question by saying yes.
No.
All right, we were talking about traffic stops.
Please, yeah.
Yes. All right, and back in the 90s, the argument was, if a stop was made entirely for a bad reason, then we could get all of the evidence suppressed, But then a United States Supreme Court case came along. It's called Wren, W-R-E-N. And Wren stood for the position that if in that person of color walking through a white neighborhood example that we did a few minutes ago, if the cop were to come into the courtroom and say, Judge, listen, I want you to know, the real reason I detained this person is because this was a black person walking through a white neighborhood. That's why I did it, Judge. But, Judge, I want you to know, there was a busted taillight. Then United States versus Wren, W-R-E-N, says that that's a good stop. So, so we don't like that, but that's the
Okay.
law of the land, and it has been for 20-something years.
So essentially, if the officer admits the reason, it's fine.
If the officer has a good reason, it doesn't matter what his actual reason was.
I see.
So,
Okay.
he might see 10 cars with busted taillights and might not stop any of them. But he stops one with a busted taillight, and the reason he does it is a bad reason, that's okay.
All right.
So, yeah, very good. All right, appreciate that. All right, let's get back to it. If you get if you're pulled over for speeding, how long do you think that the stop can last? Let's say that you're pulled over, and the reason you're pulled over is because you were speeding, but the real reason is the cop has some reason to think that you might be up to something negative. How long is the cop allowed to hold you?
That's a good question, because honestly, I would have not questioned whether he could hold me there as long as he wanted to.
All right. Here comes the answer.
Yeah.
A traffic stop can last as long as is reasonably necessary to effectuate an investigation of a ticket. All right. So typically it's 17 to 20 minutes or something like that. What lawyers argue about is somebody getting pulled over for speeding and the cop deciding, hey, we want to get a police dog here. And, a police dog shows up 30 or 40 minutes later. And you have this period of time where the entire reason for the detention is to wait for a police dog. And that's unconstitutional, so that's not okay.
I see.
All right, so what the defense lawyers are looking for in a suppression hearing, where you're arguing that there never should have been this detention and search, is that if there is detention, it needs to only last long enough to effectively investigate a ticket. Things like letting the cop go in and looking, checking the driver's license, checking to see if there's any warrants, collecting registration, issuing the ticket itself. And that normally takes 10 or 20 minutes. All right.
So what do I as a driver do if I suspect they're holding me longer to get a dog out here?
Excellent question. you constantly say, am I free to go? Right? Am I free to go? And if and you're watching your watch, and if you get to the point where you're at 30 minutes, officer, are you sure I'm not free to go? Because what takes 30 minutes? I've had my share of speeding tickets. None of them taking 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you're being detained only for the purpose of waiting on a police dog, then that's inappropriate. The word unconstitutional gets thrown around, but it is. Okay. All right. So you get pulled over for speeding. What can a cop do during the time that you're pulled over? Can he ask you to get out of the car, or do you know?
I don't know that.
He can. He can.
He can ask me to get out of the car.
He can.
Okay.
Can he ask you? Can he pat you down? What do you think?
I would think not.
Okay, that's a good instinct. All right. The phrase is reasonable, articulable suspicion that you have a weapon. Okay?
Yeah.
So cynical defense lawyers feel like cops come into suppression hearings all the time and say things that I'm going to make some cops angry tonight. I don't mean to. I've got very dear friends that are cops. But we feel like cops come in to this suppression hearings and they say, well, I had an officer safety concern and I frisked him. But that's not appropriate. The officer has to have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that the person had a weapon. So you want to think, is there the outline of a weapon in a pocket? That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Some people that are watching might know local civil rights activist John Green, and he got arrested several years ago. And the cops had him down on his face, grinding his face into the concrete, and frisking him and stuff. And he's just screaming, "What's your reasonable, articulable suspicion?" It was, it's a great video.
So then, if you do have a weapon, if you're a concealed carry, and I don't know this because I'm not a concealed carrier, do you have to report that if you're pulled over?
Of course.
So you're
Absolutely.
required by law. They pull you over. Hey, you're getting a speeding ticket,
Absolutely.
officer. I've got a concealed weapon.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But I was talking about what they need to do.
What they need to do, yes.
Yeah, if you get out of the car and if you get pulled over for speeding and the cop says, "Hey, look, we've got a police dog here. The dog's going to walk around your car. We need you to get out," and then he starts to frisk you, then in your mind you need to know that that officer must have determined already, must have an articulable suspicion that you have a gun, and if he doesn't, he shouldn't be frisking you like that.
Yeah. What are your options in that moment?
Well,
aside from screaming as you're chewing on the dirt.
That is your option. Your option is to recognize that out in the field, the officer is the law. If an officer came in here right now, right this minute, and said, "Gene, get on the ground," I would do it. Now, over the next 6 weeks, I'd be going to his, internal affairs office and I'd be making some complaints. But no, the officer is the law out there. And I'm going to skip ahead because of your question.
Please,
right now. Right. If an officer goes to pull you over, and you see blue lights, and you know that you weren't speeding, and you know that you had not run a red light, and you decide, this officer must be a jerk, I don't want any part of this darn redneck cop, and you step on the gas. Do you think that's okay?
No, I do not.
Good instinct. Yeah. Okay. And here's where we get into it. On the other hand, if you're walking down the street, minding your own business, and you know you've done nothing wrong, and an officer comes up and says, "Hey, stop, I want to talk to you," and you know you've done nothing wrong, and in a academic sense that he doesn't have any actual appropriate reasonable suspicion, and you take off, you can do that. That is actually okay. It's not, I wouldn't advise it, you know, but that's because there's a less amount of danger associated with walking away or running away from a bad cop. The legislators don't want us to drive away from a bad cop. So if there's a bad traffic stop about to happen and you flee, suddenly you have given law enforcement actual probable cause for a crime, because that's actually a felony. Fleeing from a member of law enforcement, to heck with why they're pulling you over. So don't do it.
Right. But on foot,
you can do it.
Perfectly acceptable.
You can do it, but it's at your own peril, because you might be sitting there thinking, I'm Dr. Ruiz, smart guy from Notre Dame, and I know this cop shouldn't be telling me to stop. Well, what if you're wrong? What if the cop actually had some, so don't run from a cop.
Fair enough.
All right. We talked about duration. We talked about, so you don't have a Miranda warning right for a traffic stop. So if you get pulled over and it says, "Hey, Dr. Ruiz, do you know how fast you were going?" You know, answer him. You know, I think I was going 30, or whatever you want to say. On the other hand, what if he pulls you over for speeding, and while he's talking to you, about speeding, he starts to say, "Hey, do you have anything in your car that might get you in trouble?" You have to answer that. I would think not, right? I would think at that point,
hope not, yes.
Yeah, I would think at that point that officer should properly have said something like, "Hey, let me tell you about your rights. You're not free to go. I'm going to ask you questions about something that's completely unrelated to a traffic stop, and therefore I'm going to read you some warnings."
Mm-hmm.
The point is, whether a judge feels like that's traffic related or not, in an academic stance, if you're asked questions that have to do with nothing about a traffic stop, that's when Miranda gets triggered. All right, we're to the point now where we got to take another break. We'll be right back. Ask us some more questions back on Justice for All.
I'm Emily Echeverria, Marketing Communications Director for Council on Aging of West Florida and the host of Coming of Age. Watch our show to find out what we're doing for our seniors and their families, and hear from area experts and local business owners about their programs and services. Want to help? Find out how you can work with us to bring a better future to our seniors. Watch Coming of Age, 3:30 p.m. Wednesdays, only on Blab TV.
A little history. When our founders drafted the Bill of Rights, they included the 8th Amendment to prohibit excessive cash bail. They never meant for it to hold people in jail. They knew excessive bail would create a two-tiered system of justice, one for the rich and one for everyone else. Bail routinely traps people in jail before they've even had their day in court. That's why the Bail Project helps those who can't afford it while fighting to end cash bail, because freedom should be free.
All right, we're back on Justice for All. We've got a text message. It came during the break. It says, my boyfriend has just gotten his medical marijuana card. What privileges does it allow him? Do you work with any people that have medical marijuana cards?
I work with an awful lot of people who have medical marijuana.
Okay, then answer the question, Dr. Ruiz.
Well, so I can just talk from a mental health standpoint, right?
Sure.
One of the benefits of having a medical marijuana card is there's really a lot of people who, for a lot of really legitimate reasons, don't want to use psychiatric medications for things like anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress or what have you. There's plenty of reason to have some hesitation about that, and people feel a lot more comfortable with medical marijuana. And so it's got some benefits in curbing anxiety. It's got some benefits in helping with sleep, helping with some of the terrible dreams that go along with sleep for a lot of people. So certainly that kind of benefit is, I honestly see that quite a bit, and it's increasing.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think part of the gist of the question was she wants to know what rights does her boyfriend have now that he has a medical marijuana card? He can't just go buy a bag of weed on the corner.
Well, no, but so my understanding of the process, and please callers call in and clarify this for me, is you have to go to a doctor who can prescribe it. You have to get a medical marijuana card from the state, and once you do that, there's dispensaries all around town. I usually advise people, get a real doctor, because there's a lot of doctors who just rubber stamp it for you. But they can talk to you about of the millions of strains of different types of marijuana, what's the best one for you? Go to this shop down on Cervantes, or go to this shop down on, whatever street in town, and you basically kind of have a candy store's choice of different strains and varieties of marijuana to look at for your anxiety, for your depression, for your appetite, for your sleep, for, whatever the issues are. And yeah, then therefore you now have that benefit of, I can go into these places, I can legally acquire it, I can legally carry it and use it. You can't use it in public, public spaces. You can't be smoking a joint out in the middle of Palafox or anything like that. But you have it and you can use it. Now, and that's honestly a question I would have for you as far as some of the benefits of that, because it is it's legal in the state as a medical substance. It is illegal nationally.
Yeah.
If I'm driving down the street and I've got a bag full of weed in my pocket because I got a medical marijuana card,
right?
What's
you mentioned a dispensary, so I think that the caller needs to know this.
Yeah.
I had a case about a year ago where, you know, a young lady was on probation, and while she was on probation, she had a positive urinalysis for marijuana. And she said, Gene, don't worry about it. You know, I have a medical marijuana card. And I got on the phone, I called her probation officer, and I said, yeah, I understand that this lady's, you know, got an allegation against her that she's got a dirty urinalysis for marijuana, but, you know, I've got a copy of her medical marijuana card right here. And the probation officer said, well, Gene, that's fine. And what this just means is she's not behaving intelligently, because what we do when we see that there's a positive urinalysis for marijuana, and they have a marijuana card, because she told me, you know, she said, Gene, your client told me she has a marijuana card, is we go into some sort of database, and we're able to check to see if this person purchased marijuana from a proper dispensary. And she said, and Gene, your client has not. You know, and
Yeah.
that violation stuck, and that lady went to jail. You know, so I guess the texter needs to know if you have a card, you know, that allows you to purchase, you know, medical marijuana. It doesn't allow you to purchase it on the street, and merely having the card doesn't get you out of trouble. I see 2 more text messages, so I want to read these. The first is it true that if you deny the cops' request to search your car, they are immediately required to get a dog in the state of Florida? Absolutely not. That's not true. You deny, you know, what you do is, the officer says, hey, listen, is it okay if I search your car? You know, you say, well, officer, if you're asking for my permission, my consent, then my answer is no. If you're telling me that I have to let you know, well, that's them saying they've already formed a probable cause and a reasonable suspicion that you're doing something wrong. When you talk about a search, you know, a search is presumed to be invalid if law enforcement doesn't have a warrant. In a traffic stop, they almost never have a warrant. So then you look at exceptions to the warrant requirement. If I get pulled over because I'm speeding, and the cops run my license, and they find that my license was suspended, so now I've committed a crime of driving a car with a suspended license, now they can search my car incident to a lawful arrest. A search incident to arrest, that is an exception to the warrant requirement. But the question here is, if you deny the request, are they immediately required to get a dog? No, the answer is no. What dogs are there for, as agents of law enforcement, is to enhance reasonable suspicion. So if you get pulled over for speeding, and the officer has some idea that, you know, Dr. Ruiz might be doing something wrong, and then the cop's going to get on the phone real quickly and say, hey, look, I just pulled Dr. Ruiz over for speeding. Get your dog over here. And if he can get that dog over in 10 or 15 minutes, or however long it's thought of to take, and he can get that dog to run around the car and alert, then, you know, he can do a search. But the answer to your question is no. It's a good question, though. Another text message, it says, if you're stopped by a police officer for a traffic violation, does your passengers have to provide additional? Good question. If you're stopped by, and I'll put it to you, Doc.
Yeah.
The smartest guy in the room who happened to not go to law school. Very good. All right. If you're stopped, if you and your wife are driving down the street and you get stopped for speeding, and your wife says, you know, honey, you're on your own. I told you not to speed. I'm getting out, and she just starts walking. You think she can do that? No.
No, I would say no. Yeah.
Okay. And what if the officer says, hey, listen, you know, you're obviously a friend of Dr. Ruiz. You're his passenger. Unfortunately, we pulled him over for speeding. We want your driver's license. Does your passenger have to do that?
My gut would tell me no, but I would find that to be a very tricky situation to navigate.
Yeah, she does.
She does have to.
She absolutely does, yeah. And what if a cop pulls you over for speeding, your wife's in the car, and within that 10 or 15 minutes time for the speeding, a police dog shows up? Do you and your wife both have to get out of your car where they effectuate a sniff around the car?
Well, I'm guessing the answer is yes.
Our rights do get minimized, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Those are text messages. Those are the text messages. All right, let's try to get on to something else here. Where were we? what do you think an officer needs? You know, does he have to have a radar gun to pull you over for speeding?
Gee, that's a good question. I always thought that they did. I always thought they had to have some measurable way
Very good.
to verify that you were speeding, right?
Very good. It's kind of a two-thought process. To make a speeding ticket stick, the officer can be a non-expert, but he has to come in and give detailed reasons to feel that you were speeding. And it's harder for a speeding ticket to stick. On the other hand, what if he's pulling you over just, you know, to determine whether there's some misconduct going on? He's on the side of the road, he sees his car obviously blow by, and he just happens to not have a radar gun. Sure, he can effectuate a traffic stop. Whether a speeding ticket will ultimately stand in a court is a different question.
That's a different question.
Yeah.
So that raises a different question for me, because I had heard from someone I trust very much that here in the state of Florida, it might not be quite kosher for the police officers to be sitting in a stop location registering every driver with their radar gun.
It's rude.
Is that rude? Is that legal?
They
Is
can
that
do it,
illegal?
yeah.
They can totally do that.
Well, they can more than do that. They can predatorially do that. They can, on any given day in Gulf Breeze, you might see members of law enforcement driving through the parking lots at Publix, you know, just looking at every license plate. Yeah, they certainly can do that.
So, yeah, okay.
All right. If a police officer drives through a parking lot and sees a car and runs the license plate and sees that the license plate goes to a registered owner whose license is suspended, can he stop that car?
I would think so.
He can.
Yeah.
He can. All right. What if he runs the license plate and sees that the registered owner is John Flynn, white, red-haired boy from Iowa, and then as he goes to pull the car over, because the registered owner has a suspended plate and is John Flynn, white boy, he sees that the actual driver of the car is a Chinese 65-year-old woman, can he still pull the car over, given that the registered owner of the car has a bad license?
You tell me. That's
No.
a tricky one.
No,
They
he
cannot.
cannot do that. He can't
Okay.
do that. He doesn't have to look, you know. He sees a car, just does a quick check and says, oh, well, the doggone license is suspended for the registered owner, he can pull it over. But if he knows, if the cop knows that the registered owner is definitely not the person actually driving the car, no, he cannot pull the car.
It strikes me the more and more you talk about these questions, it's very, very tricky for you as a defense attorney to really weed through all the details of all of these things that are right and wrong, and did they actually occur the way they're supposed to occur?
Well, you know, there was a neat guy that was an assistant U.S. attorney. And when I first around here, neat guy, big giant guy, college football player, he could do backflips even as a 50-year-old guy. When I first started doing this, I heard that he was teaching a class out at PJC. And I was a 25-year-old lawyer in the public defender's office. I thought, well, I'll take Mr. Baird's class, you know. And pretty much it was just me, a young public defender, and a bunch of cops, right? And here's this senior level assistant U.S. attorney, Ben Beard, and he's talking to us about exactly what you're talking about. And he says, I don't mind telling you. And he didn't necessarily know that he had a young public defender in his class. He pretty much felt like he had a bunch of cops in his class. Here's what he said. And he's a good dude, but here's what he said. He said, I'll tell you, in a lot of my suppression hearings, at the time of the traffic stop, the officer didn't have reasonable suspicion. But by the time we had a suppression hearing, they did, which kind of broke my heart.
Yeah.
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 But that kind of stuff happens. Anyway, bless his heart, Ben Beard. How about, is it against the law to drive down the road? Can you get pulled over properly for driving down the road too slowly?
I believe so. I'm basing that on seeing signs on various roads that say minimum speed, so I'd imagine that is possible, yeah.
There are a lot of things like that, like having your blinker on too long, like not having your blinker on at all, like changing lanes, you know, inappropriately, that it's not an infraction without the element that obstruction takes place. You know, if what your conduct, if conduct like driving too slowly, if it's seen by a member of law enforcement as obstructing traffic or causing a danger, then it is a violation. Otherwise, it's not. Now, the joke is, in some circumstances like that, the officer can say, yeah, he was obstructing traffic. I was that traffic. So don't drive too slowly.
Fair enough.
It's time for another break. This is our last break. We're going to have 15 more minutes. Come back with us and ask us questions for Dr. Ruiz or for me.
At Pensacola Habitat for Humanity, we believe every child should have a safe place to grow. That's why we work with you and the community to build not just a house, but a home.
She worked very hard to get this house. I really appreciate that because, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here right now.
When you help build a home, you build a future. Pensacola Habitat for Humanity.
Animal Allies is looking for volunteers, and there are many ways that you can help. From taking care of cats to using your computer and social media skills, any and all assistance is greatly appreciated. We have morning and afternoon shifts every day or help at adoption events. You can even foster a kitty at home. And it counts towards community service hours for bright futures. Find Animal Allies Florida on Facebook and Instagram or go to aaflorida.org/volunteer.
All right, we're back on Justice for All. We've got another text message. I really appreciate the messages. Like I said, the show is better when you text and when you call. And no doubt about it, later tonight or tomorrow morning, Barry will call me up and say, did you get any phone calls? And I'll feel like a loser if we don't get any calls. But here's another text message. Text message is, what is a 3.850? All right, now I'm smiling. Mark, do you know what a 3.850 is?
I'm assuming that's not a mental health code for a disability or something.
No, it's not. I'm smiling because while it's an important rule of criminal procedure, it's not the favorite one of the criminal defense lawyer. 3.850 is the rule associated with ineffective assistance. And ineffective assistance is very important. You know, the number one reason cases come back on appeal, I've been told, is a finding by the court that the lawyer didn't provide effective assistance. Mm-hmm. So if you hire an attorney, if you get an attorney, if you get arrested, and you're either appointed a lawyer or you hire one, and the case doesn't go very well and it's over, the judge will stand in front of you and say, now you have 30 days to file an appeal, right? What you have within 2 years is to make a claim. You have the right to make a claim that you were denied due process because your lawyer didn't give you appropriate assistance. So that's what Rule 3.850 is. In the metaphorical locker room of the criminal defense lawyers, you might see a lawyer hanging his or her head, feeling like they didn't do a good job, and the words 3.850 might be coming out of their mouth. So, all right, thank you for the text message.
How common is that? It strikes me that any defendant who gets a bad judgment would immediately claim that.
It's quite frequent.
Yeah.
And whereas I sat there and I said it might be the most common reason for reversals. There are a lot of frivolous 3.850 claims.
I'm sure. Is there any consequence for a frivolous?
Of course not. So
okay.
If someone gets a 20-year prison sentence, their appeals fail, then of course they're sitting there and they're filing some claim saying, hey, my lawyer didn't call a certain witness, or my lawyer told me I wasn't allowed to testify, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's good as part of our system of checks and balances that we have that, because I mean, Doc, you know me, I'm a goofball, I make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be some remedy, some vehicle for. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we've got 9 more minutes, and what I'd like to do is would you talk to us about how someone like me, a criminal defense lawyer, might benefit from working with someone like you in a criminal case? You did it a little bit when we were talking about the Rob Reiner case.
Sure. Well, thank you. The reason folks like me exist within the legal framework is because there are
I'm sorry, Doc.
Please.
You're saying we get a call. Which one is it? Say what?
Park 10.
Did I get it? All right, you're on Justice for All. Thank you very much for calling.
Hey, Gene, this is John.
Did you hear me say that I felt like a loser because John hadn't called?
No, buddy. Listen, let me tell you something. I didn't get to see the last show,
Yes, sir.
and I tuned in late today. I've kind of had a real goofy schedule lately, but excellent show. Just wanted to tell you hello and good show.
You didn't have to lie. You could acknowledge that you're really watching Trump over there giving the State of the Union right now.
No, actually, I'm not.
All right. Hey, you said, did you hear us say where Barry is right now?
No. Where is Barry?
He's down the street right this minute at the Pensacola Sports Association year-end banquet, accepting an award on behalf of his son, Drew. But I will tell him that you called.
Okay, buddy. That's great.
I appreciate you, John.
Well, hope everything's okay. Got a good show there, and enjoyed what I have seen.
Hey, you're very kind. Thank you.
See you later.
All right. How do I hang this up? Hang up, John.
There is no call in the
Good
queue.
God. All right.
There you go.
Okay. So you were talking about how I might benefit as a criminal
Yes.
defense lawyer from somebody like
Yes,
you.
and because so many in the criminal justice system have an outsized predominance of mental illness, right? So
Sure.
of course, mental illness can contribute to a crime, the commission of a crime. Mental illness can make it harder for someone to testify on their own behalf, to really participate in the criminal process. Mental illness can, cause insanity at the time of the crime, right? So a defense attorney like yourself or the public defender's office can often call us in to say, we've got this defendant. We really think mental health issues are a major part of either what he needs from the criminal justice system or what got him into the criminal justice system. What can you tell us? How does this impact the crime committed? How does this impact his potential sentencing? Because after all, I hate to say it, but more than 50%, closer to 60% of the people with mental illness in the prison system don't get treated, right? So it's really is in y'all's best interest, my best interest, public's best interest, to get this information gathered so we can get people the real treatment they need rather than simply incarceration.
I have a question. You came on before and you talked about, I sometimes am able to help a defense lawyer or a defendant, mitigation. I'm often able to, let a court know that somebody was not competent. I'm often able to, but what about, we talked about statements. We talked about Miranda earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
Might a person be competent, that he or she can, hold a job, brush their teeth, put on their shoes, but so mentally diminished that they can't understand the concepts and the Miranda warnings that members of law enforcement might get?
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Whether it's because of dementia, whether it's because of some sort of developmental disability, the fact of the matter is Miranda rights, as straightforward as they are, they require some level of understanding. And so that can and would be a part of the process is this person who's sitting in front of you, do they really understand their rights? Do they really understand what is going on? Not everybody does, for a variety of reasons. And that, very much a legitimate reason why psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health practitioners get involved in the legal system, because those people need that kind of protection.
In the work you've done in criminal, in evaluating people in the jail, are most of them a sanity concern or most of them a competency concern?
Far more are competency concerns. That is, again, whether they are competent to stand trial and understand the trial process. Insanity is a very rarely used defense, and it's also very rarely successful. So that's much less common. Mitigation is far more common than either of them, and that is does this person have mental health factors that need specialized treatment and therefore need consideration in sentencing.
Let's say that I had somebody that seemed like a good person, but they just suffered from a tremendous addiction, and I was concerned that their addiction led them to, misconduct. Is that someone that you might prepare a report for, and what would that report do for the court?
So the report, yes, it can help. Primarily, it's going to help them if there's ways in which they can join diversionary programs or get some specialized substance abuse treatment, because otherwise, unfortunately, substance abuse is not really considered mitigation for criminal issues in the same way as mental health issues are.
I'll tell you, I asked the question because I was thinking of one time when you helped one of my folks. There was a program, I think it was in South Florida, that I hadn't been even familiar with. But in the body of your report, you had a recommendation. This person would benefit from a place like, and I think it was the Phoenix House in South Florida. When you evaluate someone, do you actually get into the weeds and look for places where they might, get treatment? Is that often part of one of your reports, or
not
did
often.
You just do that for me because you're a nice guy?
It's not often part, but that certainly is something that we will get involved in. Absolutely, because ultimately I'm a psychologist. I want people to get help.
Okay.
So.
Oh, it's time to wrap up? Okay. All right, it says, we got one more text. Is it against the law to flash your headlights to oncoming traffic? Yes, if you see a cop parked watching the traffic. Yes, that is frowned upon, so don't do that. Thank you for the message, though. So now are we wrapping up? How much time do we have? We are at time. All right, good night, guys.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you.